The British Empire was the largest empire to ever exist in human history, and although it did not literally rule every corner of the globe, it stretched farther and lasted longer than most other powers could have ever imagined. At its height, it reached across every continent and influenced nearly every nation in some way. Its dominance was not achieved overnight, but instead was the result of geographical fortune, careful planning, powerful naval strength, and above all, a relentless focus on trade and expansion. The island geography of Britain itself provided a major advantage to the growth of the empire. Being an island meant that the nation was less vulnerable to constant invasion. Unlike countries surrounded on all sides by rival states, Britain had a natural shield of water. Of course, this did not mean that the British were completely safe, but it did make conquest by a foreign army far more difficult. In addition, the border situation of Britain was relatively simple compared to many continental states. With Scotland and England eventually uniting under the Crown in 1707, the nation of Great Britain was born. From that moment, the only outward borders of the new nation were the waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. This maritime position made Britain perfectly placed for overseas expeditions. Any foreign land along the coast was reachable by sea. Instead of marching through hostile lands to reach a target, Britain only needed to set sail and direct its fleet to almost any port in the world. Yet such opportunities would have been wasted without a strong navy, and this is where Britain shined above nearly every other power. The Royal Navy grew into the centerpiece of British power. By the 18th century, it was one of the most formidable forces on the seas. This did not happen by accident. Both the British government and its people invested heavily in the construction of ships and the development of weapons. They believed strongly that their future wealth and safety lay across the oceans, and they were willing to pour resources into making sure the Royal Navy could dominate. The Navy was not only for protection, it also allowed Britain to expand trade routes, enforce its policies, and project power on a global scale. The success of the British Empire was not only built on warships, but on trade. From the very beginning, Britain focused on commerce rather than simple conquest. Wealth came from goods, and goods flowed through trade. During the 17th century, the empire expanded into North America and the West Indies, and with these new colonies came the chance to establish a closed commercial system. The colonies were required to send their exports back to Britain and buy imported products through British merchants. This arrangement ensured that wealth stayed within the empire. The Navigation Act of 1651 put this system into law by requiring that all colonial goods be carried on British ships. The colonies enjoyed some advantages as they were granted monopolies in the British market for their products, but the system above all enriched the empire itself. British merchants gained a near complete hold over trade and shipping, while the Crown profited from taxes, duties, and economic growth. Over time, this system developed into a vast machine of mercantilism that drove the empire forward. One of the most important institutions to emerge during this period was the British East India Company. Originally created to trade with East Asia, Southeast Asia, and India, the company soon grew beyond its original mission. It began with the spice trade but quickly expanded into silk, cotton, tea, opium, and many other goods. Over time, politics seeped into the company as it became not just a merchant house but also a political power. The company's private armies and influence in India made it one of the most powerful organizations in the world. Unlike some other empires that relied heavily on brute conquest, Britain often began expansion with trade posts. This approach allowed them to establish a presence without immediately needing full military control. Yet this does not mean that the British Empire was free from violence. Wars with Spain and the Netherlands marked the early years of expansion, and later, conflicts with colonies themselves revealed the darker side of imperial ambition. The American Revolution stands as one of the clearest examples. Britain's attempt to tighten control and impose taxes on its American colonies without representation in Parliament sparked rebellion. The cry of no taxation without representation swept across the colonies, and when Britain sent troops to put down the unrest, it only fueled the determination for independence. France and Spain allied with the Americans, and by the Peace of Paris in 1783, Britain was forced to acknowledge American independence. This was a devastating blow, as it meant the loss of some of the richest colonies. But Britain did not collapse after this defeat. Instead, it adapted. What followed is sometimes called the Second British Empire. Having lost its American possessions, Britain turned its eyes toward Asia, Africa, and Australia. Trade with the newly independent United States actually continued, but the empire redirected its expansion efforts elsewhere. Australia became a key target. Although first sighted by Dutch explorers, it was claimed for Britain by James Cook in 1770 and would soon be settled. Under the Crown, in South Asia, Britain faced a series of wars and conflicts as it consolidated its grip. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 had already begun the process of British dominance in India, and the later Anglo-Mysore Wars, along with campaigns in Sind and Burma, expanded their reach even further. The East India Company also applied a controversial policy known as the Doctrine of Lapse. This rule prevented Hindu rulers without a natural heir from passing power to an adopted son. Instead, the British would seize the territory. This aggressive strategy, combined with cultural and religious tensions, led to the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. The rebellion spread quickly across India as soldiers and civilians rose against British rule. It was a bloody and difficult conflict, and although the British managed to crush it by 1859, the event marked a turning point. The East India Company was dissolved, and India came directly under the Crown. British control of India would last until independence was finally achieved in 1947. Africa also became a focus of expansion. While the Royal African Company had engaged in the slave trade as early as the 17th century, large-scale territorial claims did not come until the 19th century. Britain joined the race for Africa alongside Germany, Italy, and other European states. The Berlin Conference of 1884 attempted to regulate this scramble, and Britain came away with large swaths of territory. At its height, the British Empire controlled all of southern Africa and most of the northeast. Roughly 30% of the African population fell under British rule. At the peak of its global power, Britain ruled about a quarter of the world's land surface and nearly a fifth of its population. By 1938, the empire stretched so widely that the phrase "the sun never sets on the British Empire" became more than just a saying. It was a literal truth, as somewhere across the globe, there was always a British possession in daylight. This immense prosperity rested on three main pillars. First was geography. Britain's island position gave it both protection and opportunity. Second was naval might. The Royal Navy ensured that trade routes were secure, and enemies could be confronted far from British shores. Third was the emphasis on trade and wealth over simple conquest. The British Empire was less about a single ruler demanding power, and more about building a global economic system. The empire was not without controversy and brutality. The exploitation of colonies, the use of military force when trade alone was not enough, and the lasting scars of cultural and political domination remain debated to this day. Yet its scale and its impact on the modern world are undeniable. The legacy of the British Empire lives on in language, in systems of government, in global trade routes, and in the very borders of many nations. English is spoken as a common language across continents largely because of British expansion. Parliamentary democracy, as practiced in many countries, can trace roots back to British influence. Even railroads, legal codes, and educational systems in parts of Asia, Africa, and the Pacific bear the marks of empire. When we look back at the British Empire, we see not just a story of ships and colonies, but a massive system that reshaped the world. It rose from the advantages of geography and the determination of its people to seek wealth overseas. It relied on the Royal Navy to protect its interests. It thrived on trade networks that tied far-off colonies to the heart of London. It fought wars, lost some territories, and gained others. And above all, it created a legacy that continues to echo across the modern world. The empire may have dissolved in the 20th century with colonies achieving independence, but the shadow of its reach is still visible today. Whether in language, in culture, in politics, or in economics, the British Empire left a mark that cannot be ignored. It remains the largest empire in history, not only in land and population, but also in the depth of its influence.